All right. So look, in the wake of last week's big story, the Quebec tuition hike for all these for McGill and Concordia for those universities, we heard the outrage not just from the universities, but from I think a lot of people here, including French media, French university people weighing in as well. Hasn't changed the government's mind yet, but in the interim, the question came up fairly early. What can these universities do? Is there a legal challenge that can be mounted here? What would it look like? Thought we'd ask Julius Grey, human rights lawyer who joins us from time to time on these sorts of issues. Mr. Grey, thank you for being here. And let me begin by asking the question right off the top. Can there be a legal challenge here, and what would it look like?
There certainly can be a legal challenge. The courts oversee everything in our society. What is impossible is to predict the result. You can never predict the result of a legal case, and anybody who thinks he does is less a lawyer than a prophet. The legal challenge would obviously be based on the charter. It is that people are being charged different prices depending upon whether they go to French or English university, whether they study in English or French. And language is one of the forbidden grounds of discrimination. It follows that one could certainly structure a challenge whether or not one would succeed. And I think other people should join it, not just the universities. There should be representatives of the English community, of the French community, because both communities are equally hurt by this narrow-minded and petty attempt to destroy some of the best institutions. And remember, 2 years ago, when they announced the limits on CEGEP, one of the things they said is that CEGEP is a path to McGill, and McGill is a path to assimilation. So their obsession with McGill, the desire to bring McGill and Concordia down to the level of a little minority college is still there. They're still where some of the nationalists were in 1969 when they marched for McGill Français. And it's the most counterproductive thing for both francophones, anglophones, allophones, everyone. It's the destruction of what we have developed over the years, which makes us unique in the world and in the university sphere.
Well, so let me ask a question then. We have two elements here. Number one is the hike in tuition fees. That's number one. And would make, according to McGill and Concordia, make them less competitive because every other university in Canada of equal stature charges less. And number two, this now 80% requirement of French for graduating students. You challenge it on both ends. Can you challenge the tuition hike in and of itself?
More on the first one. French for graduating students from other provinces is in the realm of the absurd, isn't it? I mean, it's and not that it isn't a good idea. It'll do those students a lot of good. But requiring that does Quebec no good. It's simply an attempt to diminish those universities. So the first argument is the right one. But the second argument, which is simply that we're witnessing like the peeling of an onion, a step-by-step destruction of institutions merely because of the language of instruction, is an important one. And I think it could certainly be argued. Whether or not we would win depends on the circumstances at that time. But I think what I am convinced of is that francophones and anglophones would join together on this particular measure. This is simply narrow-mindedness. The CAC justified its language laws by saying French is in danger, which was not true, and we can show that it isn't in danger. But even if it were, there is no way that this tuition hike will promote French. It's simply a mean-spirited attempt to diminish. I think if somebody launched the challenge, you'd get widespread support from all groups in society.
Well, who has to launch that? Can McGill simply not begin with Concordia to launch a challenge? Are you suggesting that should be what happens first?
I think they can. It's up to them. You see, the difficulty for universities is that they're largely financed by Quebec. You know, somebody would talk about biting the hands that feed you, but it feeds you very badly. So at a certain point, you might decide to go. But they have their own reasons whether to do so or not to do so. But there are other people who would join such a challenge, such as the CEGEPs, perhaps, such as the Quebec English community,
Mm-hmm.
such as various cultural groups in Quebec. I would hope professors and professors' unions would join. People would join to fight something that has no positive effect for anybody and merely narrows the horizons of all Quebecers.
I wonder how many people listening to this think, okay, that sounds like a great idea. Clearly something has to be done. The university shouldn't just roll over here and accept that. I understand that. But then we look at a situation where previous challenges, like in Bill 96 and Bill 21 and Bill 40 and Bill 23, end up taking years and years to finally be resolved, if and when they do get resolved. Is that what you're looking at here?
The legal system is stuck on delays and procedures. In the same way, of course, that the medical system is stuck on supply and emergency rooms and so on. And so it does take time. But I think rather than do nothing, people should consider what they can do. It's not only taking legal challenges, well, that's something that has happened every time. It's also writing, publishing, speaking, bringing to the entire Quebec population the absurdity of the attack on bilingual institutions and on McGill and Concordia in particular.
I'm going to speculate here. So I mentioned Bill 23, which we know when it got to the Quebec Superior Court, that it was basically put on hold. It was suspended for a time being, and eventually the government walked away from it. Could that happen in a case like this as well if it went to Superior Court here first?
One could try. Those are very hard things to obtain because one would argue that the government has a certain presumption in constitutional law, presumption of validity, and you'd have to persuade a judge in first instance that he should overlook that presumption. But it has been done with the language of the courts, and certainly it could probably be attempted, successfully or not. I don't think one should decide whether to take proceedings based on 100% success predictions, because you never have those. And the things that you think are 100% turn out to be much more iffy. And the things that you worry about when you start turn out to be very productive.
I will ask you one last thing. We're out of time. You mentioned something just a couple of minutes ago, this idea that, and the government keeps harping on this, that the French language is threatened. Yet we all know there have been studies that show it's not threatened whatsoever. And I think both universities pointed that out. How is there a definitive way to establish that one way or the other?
Well, definitive, the future cannot be established definitively, but you can establish it quite clearly by showing a number of things. There's a book that came out at Laval University, to which I contributed an essay a few weeks ago that brings those elements in doubt. Look, there has never been a language that has lost its population where there was an obligatory and free system of education, as there is in Quebec, because education in English is an exception. And I agree with Bill 101. That had to be done. But at the same time, once you've got that, there is simply no evidence for any language disappearing. To that, you have to add that the French language appears to be stronger than it ever was in terms of theater, culture, signs, atmosphere. There is the book by Frédéric Lacroix, which says that Bill 101 has failed, that the French is in danger, is fundamentally based on incorrect figures and on errors almost of computation. There's no example that can be brought of a place like Quebec losing its language. In fact, places which are far less developed, far less established, Puerto Rico, Ukraine, Catalonia, all kept the language when they didn't necessarily have as good a system of education as we do. So, by all reasonable standards, the danger to the French language is a myth, and it's a dangerous myth. Yes, Bill 101 was necessary. Yes, French needs protection. Yes, French is very important to all of us, not just to the Francophone, but so is English. English is part of the heritage that all Quebecers have, and they should all be able to benefit from it. And this government just doesn't see it.
Mr. Grey, I thank you as always for your time. It's very much appreciated.
It's a pleasure.
Julius Grey.